now with an environmentalist who has great credentials and who is in Nashville. His name is John Noel. He's a businessman. He's a preservationist. He's on numerous boards, the Climate Institute, for example, the Tennessee Conservation Voters Organization as well, the Tennessee Parks and Greenways Committee. He's involved in clean energy and is the president of the 8-state regional Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, or SACE. That's SACE. And John Noel is, I have some questions for John Noel on a topic that's of environmental nature. We here at AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio cover this topic as news, and we're trying to use our eyes, our ocular scientific devices. We all have two of them. Those are our eyes. We're using our eyes to look at the sky and look at weather patterns, and look also at the press that proposes, the scientific press as well proposes, that what we're seeing in the skies over Chattanooga as yesterday in the extreme trail work and the creation of very muzzy gray clouds that reflect the sun in a very marvelous coat of many colors fashion, that this is part of the war on global warming. And John Noel, are you there?
I'm here.
Well, thanks for joining us. Tell us just briefly what your background is. You're an environmental activist. You've been involved in the coal wars for some time, have you not?
That's true. And I think what I would probably call it is not so much of a war, but more of a understanding that we can do better than burning fossil fuels that are affecting our atmosphere and hence our climate.
Well, in a nutshell, what does the burning of coal do as far as it being a pollutant? What's the main hazard of it?
Well, the essence of it is that it's two hazards in coal, and it depends on the equipment that's on the coal burning power plant. One is soot that could come from it, which could actually go into snow-covered areas and put a black surface on the snow, little flecks of black, which would enhance the melting of the snow, which wouldn't have occurred if that black soot was not there. The most important one, however, is what's known as carbon. It's a gas. It comes off, you can't smell it, you can't see it, and it goes all the way up to the stratosphere. And it hangs around there for a long time, hundreds of years in some cases, and it bonds with molecules, which when the sunlight comes through the atmosphere and hits the earth and bounces back, it captures some of that returning heat and doesn't let it back out like it usually would if it didn't have so much carbon in the atmosphere. That's what's called the greenhouse effect. That's the simplest explanation. There's more to it than that. But the essence of it is that coal is the dirtiest form of fuel that we could use on the planet. Second would be oil, and third would be gas. The best forms of energy would be clean, and that would be in the neighborhood of solar, geothermal, wind energy, etc.
So the concern you have is for the burning of coal. And now when coal is burned, describe briefly the process. It's burned in giant furnaces at utility plants, say those run in our area by the Tennessee Valley Authority. What happens when coal is burned? What are the waste products that we want to talk about?
Well, I think the one that you and I had talked about that you wanted to cover was the waste product, of course, is what I just previously described, and that is the most damaging because it affects our climate. The waste product itself, after the coal is burned, is much like burning logs in a fire. When fire is done and all over, you have ash. And so you take that ash, and it's got to go somewhere. And most of the ash is deposited after they clean out the furnaces to take the ash that's really generally very close by. That was for efficiency and cost. And of course, most all coal-fired power plants are located on waterways, and waterways are where the coal ash is primarily stored. There are literally 100 of coal ash storage places all around. For example, in Nashville, Tennessee, we've got the Gallatin plant. It's somewhere just north of Nashville, virtually within sight of downtown, and it stores coal ash. And now what has been discovered is that there are over the 50 years that it's been there, they've discovered sinkholes and all sorts of things, and this leachate, they call it, from the coal ash begins to work its way into the Cumberland River, which is a drinking source of water for all of Nashville and surrounding counties. So it doesn't make sense to take waste and put it into our water, and being able to dispose of coal ash is difficult. Another part of coal ash is if it's dry, a big wind can come along and pick up that coal ash, put it into the air, and somebody breathes it. Coal ash is toxic. It's got all sorts of different toxins in it, from lead to cadmium to selenium to arsenic, and in concentrations, it can be very harmful to human health.
So when a coal plant burns coal, it has huge furnaces. There's the stack where the fumes go out. These fumes are under strict regulation. So the coal industry, the energy industry, has to trap these ashes as they go out and not allow them to go up. So you have bottom ash, which is heavy, and the light ash that you described as being subject to wind-borne, being swept off by the wind. That's called the coal fly ash. And fly, I guess, implies that it's very light. It can go airborne easily, right?
Actually, I don't know the answer to that. You may have taught me something.
Well, I'm just supposing.
I never knew why they called it light.
I'm supposing.
Anyway, the idea is, as you've described it rather correctly, and it is a waste product that is unfortunate, and that's one of the reasons I indicated that coal is the dirtiest form of energy that we use. Hence, we must figure out a way to use the cleanest form if we want to preserve the integrity of our planet.
Well, let's just talk briefly. John Noel, you are the Nashville preservationist and environmentalist. Tell us just briefly about two disasters that have happened just in the past 7 years or so. One in Tennessee and one in North Carolina, where coal fly ash and bottom ash got away. Tell us what happened at Kingston quickly.
Well, Kingston was, which is the plant just outside of Knoxville. They stored what is known as wet coal ash. You got wet and dry, and of course, wet is heavier, and so they would build essentially berms or dams for when they would extract the coal ash from the power plant, which can be seen from I-40 going into Knoxville. You can see mounds of coal. You can see part of what used to be there until one day the dam burst. And when it did, it went into the river systems nearby and contaminated the systems. It was devastating to anyone that was in its path. It was like an avalanche of coal ash. And it just spread out for miles, and it still affects the rivers. But the basics is it costs TVA over $1 billion, and they're still cleaning it up. And to their credit, they are cleaning it up. But it was unnecessary for their financial bottom line, and it's unnecessary for the public. Had we understood that the toxicity of coal ash, we would have probably handled it differently. But it kind of got started that way. It was close. It was cheap. Put it right next to the plant, and hence that disaster happened. North Carolina, without getting into detail, had similar, but it was a different kind of release. But essentially, the dam broke and it got loose.
And that was in 2014, and that was near Eden, North Carolina. Well, coal ash is
right.
Is bad as you're describing it. It's not a hazardous material. That was ruled on in 2000 by the EPA. Right, is that right? 2000 or 2014 rather. That was declared to be not a hazardous waste. A long regurgitation period for that declaration to be found. However, there are many toxic things in coal ash and in fly ash. That being said, though, there is an industrial purpose in this waste, and my listener needs to be aware that I've proposed as a writer and a journalist covering the environment in Chattanooga that the coal fly ash is part of stratospheric aerosol geoengineering. Now, you, John Noel, I'm going to ask you about what your view is on that, but coal fly ash is highly useful. Most of it, well, about 40% of it is recycled in various things. How is coal fly ash used industrially in many, many applications? What does that market look like?
Well, I'm not an expert on that, David. I wish I were. There is a number of schools of thought that, in fact, the declaration of EPA declaring that coal ash is not a hazardous material is questionable. That's my view, particularly when you and I both know that the ingredients I mentioned before that are all toxic elements are in it. So where you use it and how you use it, if you were to mix it with concrete and essentially encapsulate it, perhaps that's okay. But if you're mixing it with concrete and spreading it out on the surface so that it comes in contact with both the elements as well as people, that would be questionable in my opinion. There are a number of uses, but it's not uses like sand. You know, if you're going to make concrete, sand would be an inert process, which is usually the way it's meant and made. But the coal fly ash is mixed in with some of that to supplement some of the processes. Again, I would declare my inability to be specific simply because I'm not as knowledgeable on that other than what I've just expressed.
Well, my listener can go to Wikipedia and just look up coal ash or coal fly ash and find that there's a lengthy report about how it's used in Portland cement. It's used in embankments, soil stabilization, in flowable fill. That sounds pretty dangerous, John Noel. Asphalt, concrete, geopolymers, in bricks. It's even used in toothpaste, in railroad ties. It's found, it's used as a binding agent. And the Romans, when they built the aqueducts, used something like coal fly ash. They used ash from volcanoes in Italy. So it does have uses in that direction. But the question I want to ask you, John Noel, you've been involved with coal and the coal industry for years. What do you make of the paper that came out just recently by Dr. J. Raymond Herndon of San Diego, suggesting that with 98% certainty, coal fly ash is the material used for injections of cloud cover by jets in a program which has not been reported on in the standard press, but which is ostensibly part of the war on global warming to create cloud cover to deflect the sunlight. At least that's part of the theory anyway. What do you make of that, and what's the possibility of there being a connection?
Well, I don't believe it, because it would move into the conspiracy theory category. I mean, I respect certainly Dr. Herndon's research, but I don't practically see how it actually happens. For example, I think there was some suggestion that the jets that are flying around are releasing it. Well, if it's a passenger jet, you and I know that they don't really have a method of doing that. And I think that every airline would, since it's illegal and it would fly in the face of the Clean Air Act,
right,
I would doubt that any commercial airline would want to use that no matter what they're paid.
Or any other.
The suggestion is, sorry, go ahead.
Or so the commercial airlines or any other pilot or organization flying around would refuse to inject coal fly ash in the sky because it would violate the Clean Air Act. That's what you're saying, essentially, right? No one would want to violate the Clean Air Act.
And it's not a proven science. It's not like the scientists came out and say, hey, this is really a great idea. Everybody go do it. I think the science would actually be in the reverse of that. Geoengineering, and the explanation of that is that if we've got climate change, what is it we can spray into the atmosphere that would help keep the Earth from getting warmer? As we know, the Earth has gotten warmer essentially every single year for the past 15 years and prior to that. And, the Earth is in fact getting hotter. So geoengineering is being discussed amongst the scientific community, but most of the scientists that I know are very skeptical, simply because the cure could be worse than the disease.
So you're saying any scientists are skeptical that anything can be injected into the atmosphere to do something with the sun. And it sounds like what you said earlier, that pollution traps heat. And it seems that geoengineering would do the same thing if this program were in effect now. it would exacerbate global warming because it might deflect some sunlight, but it would certainly trap heat that would otherwise be deflected out into outer space during the nighttime.
Probably not. It probably would work on some basis simply because the coal ash wouldn't do what the carbon gas, in other words, when that invisible gas, when you burn a lump of coal that goes up into the atmosphere, that gas stays up there. But if you release fly ash into the cloud layers, which is not up into the stratosphere, it would be below that, it would eventually fall back to the earth. So it would be temporary compared to what burning the coal producing carbon, which would be the gas that goes up and stays up. So, maybe there is some validity to the fact that it could temporarily do something. But again, I look upon it as the cure is worse than the disease because of its toxicity. And also the likely ineffectiveness of it. What we have to do is to stop burning coal and start looking at cleaner forms of energy. That's the way to fix it, and need to do it pretty quickly.
And also, you're suggesting that a geoengineering program being extant is not really possible because it would have to be secret. It would have to be effectively a conspiracy, and that's not likely. You're saying?
Well, I think Dr. Herndon. Is that right, Herndon?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Herndon, I believe, is speculating that it could be the U.S. military that's doing it, and of course they have the ability to do that. But my hunch is that they don't want to do that. The Pentagon has declared global warming, climate change, to be the number one threat to security.
12 minutes and 40 seconds. We'll give you...
Mr. Leon, let those boys have a bud.